The Osawatomie is the city of history and promise. And today we're going to explore the history, not in a, this day they did this and that day they did that. In addition to that, what kind of questions do we need to be thinking about when it comes to this community? What kind of questions does the history of our town raise that I think help us kind of navigate our character as a community? And with that, I got Grady Atwater joining me. We're connecting. Can't hear me yet. There you are. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All
I've
right.
got a background on this thing, so that's why you're seeing something funny.
Yeah, and it looks like yeah. But I can see you.
Okay.
All right. How are you today?
I'm wonderful.
Good, excellent. So just a quick history here. No, not history, but just background on you as a person. You moved here when you were a young kid, and and graduated from Osawatomie High School. What year did you end up graduating from high school here?
1980.
So you're a class of 1980.
Yes.
That's awesome. They say that year was the animal class. Was that your class or the?
That was 1979.
Oh, so the guys ahead of you were a little bit more ornery.
A little bit.
So, you had a full career, and then at some point, later in life, you decided to go back to school and get your degree in history. Is that right?
That is true. Yes, I did.
All right. So that's the part I'm interested in. I am a non-traditional student. So I was 27 sitting in a classroom full of 18-year-olds. How old were you when you went back?
I was 40.
Oh, there you go. Okay, there you go. And where did you get your undergrad from?
I went to Fort Scott Community College over here, the Miami County campus, and got my I got a associate of science from there.
Okay.
And then went on to Emporia State University, earned a Bachelor of Arts in History and a Master of Arts in History from Emporia State University.
Oh, wow. So you learned how to dig through and do a considerable amount of reading to kind of put pieces of the puzzle together as far as history is concerned. That's kind of the way I'm looking at that.
Exactly. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So copious amounts of reading, researching. I'm sure you've spent plenty of time in libraries and county records and all that.
Yes, I have. I know the history I read when I was growing up. This is even when I was a building custodian and before I even went to college. I read every history book and most all the other nonfiction books in the Osawatomie Public Library.
That's awesome.
And then read, being a building custodian at the school, Osawatomie High School. The last thing you want to do is go jogging when you get back home from working and cleaning a large building and helping students. So I sat and read history books. And so it was a no-brainer when I went to college. I just kept on doing what I did for fun.
Right. Yeah.
In college.
You turned your vacation into vocation. I don't remember what that's saying. Yeah. That's excellent.
Yeah.
So you and I had a chance to sit down and talk a little bit, and some of the things that we discussed were really eye-opening. And then I've gone on and I've done my homework. So I know that you are currently teaching at Fort Scott through Miami County. Is that right?
Yes, same place I graduated from.
Excellent. Yeah, it's kind of nice to go home a little bit, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And so teaching there, you still get to you're still engaged, obviously. I mean, you'll never not be learning more about history, but the question that I asked you that I felt was kind of important, since I moved here 7 years ago, but you grew up here, you graduated from here. So what would you say to somebody like me who came here that's not originally from Osawatomie, what would you say to somebody like me that makes this town special? Why is this a place that's kind of great to live in?
The foundation, founders of our town came here uh, to the primary reason they came here was to make sure that Kansas would enter the Union as a free state. And what that meant when they moved here, when they immigrated here from the east, was they knew they were moving into a combat zone.
Wow.
Very basically, and that they were going to be targets of attack from pro-slavery guerrillas. There was going to be political discrimination against them, legal discrimination against them. So that was a courageous move for them to make.
Yeah.
And also, Osawatomie was one of the places where it was an African American, escaping enslaved African American could run to and find shelter and be moved on through the Underground Railroad to another free state community in Canada. So very courageous, forward, progressive thinking individuals founded Osawatomie. And in addition to that, it was the John Brown and made this his headquarters. I'm right behind me, behind the facade here.
Yeah.
I put up is the Dare Cabin.
Yeah.
And it was a station on the Underground Railroad.
Wow.
The Adair, and it was John Brown's headquarters. So what happened here in Osawatomie changed the world. The world was X before it came and Y afterwards.
Wow.
And Osawatomie is a place where people travel to this town from all over the world to visit this town.
It seems so unassuming, there's 3 exits off the highway and one of them's for the state hospital, and you just kind of it's something that you don't quite understand until you get here. Like, there is so much rich history in this town. So when the Kansas-Nebraska Act was enacted, when that passed, I read and saw where the Massachusetts Abolitionist Company sent groups of people to Kansas to load up the ballots for free staters. Is that am I right on that?
That's true.
It was like Topeka, Lawrence, and Osawatomie were the places that they landed. So are those the groups of people that founded Osawatomie?
The people who founded Osawatomie were directed here by the New England Immigrant Aid Society, just like I said, yes. And they were paid, and what they did was the New England Immigrant Aid Society paid their passage on riverboats, on the trains out here. And when they got here, the New England Immigrant Aid Society, the National Kansas Committee, had sent clothes and supplies for them to get started. And there was an agent named O.C. Brown who was here to direct them, and Reverend Samuel Adair and others, to direct them to where they could get started.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So how big was what year was this town officially incorporated?
Officially, it became a city of the third class in 1887, I believe, if I have it right, 1880s.
Oh, okay. So, but there were okay.
But I mean, okay, realistically though, it was founded on October 22nd, 1854.
Okay, so there was probably 3 or 4 years there of people living in this town, farming the land and building a life for themselves. What I found is that trying to track John Brown, you would have to use one of those Santa trackers, because this guy, he was all over the place. He was back and forth and back. And He's made stops everywhere along the way. But what's really interesting is that he would announce himself as Osawatomie Joan Brown,
Mm-hmm.
even though he probably lived here less than most of the other places that he was at. Um,
Mm-hmm.
he wanted people to know he was Osawatomie John Brown.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
That's
Osawatomie was internationally important, still is,
yeah,
uh, in historical terms, but at the time it was in the news all over the world because it was a center, a confluence of conflict for the abolitionist cause.
yeah.
It was where it was. I really compare it to the Afghanistan and of its day,
Well, what
and
do you
the
mean by that?
well because guerrilla war.
Ah, okay.
And what was happening was um, people were coming in to Kansas, coming into Osawatomie from all over the world to fight on either side of the issue.
Wow.
And just like in Afghanistan, where you had people coming in from Saudi Arabia all over to fight, for the Mujahideen and when they were fighting the Russians and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so it was it was very similar in
Okay.
that newspapers all over the world were recording daily activity, daily skirmishes, fights that were happening in and around Osawatomie.
Wow. That's really interesting. And that's something I had no idea about.
Mm-hmm.
When so what kind of I guess what would it take? What kind of I'm trying to think how to put this because if you asked me to take my wife, my 7-year-old, and my 3-year-old into travel for 2.5 months, and that in and of itself was not easy, and then go somewhere to fight for a cause. What do you think it takes for somebody to do that? What kind of people were moving here and planting their families in this community?
People who are highly motivated by ideals.
Okay.
Uh, the the abolitionists, to be an abolitionist in the 1850s, you had to be an extremely brave human being.
Okay.
And the reason you had to be an extremely brave human being was that most people, even people who were opposed to slavery spreading, viewed abolitionists as radical extremists
Right.
and who were they were tearing apart the collective uh,
The fabric of society.
society. I mean, you're messing up everything by
Yeah.
proposing this radical change that African Americans should be freed from slavery. Uh, More radical was John Brown and many of the abolitionists who came here to Osawatomie, in that if you taught that African Americans were illegal or were equals
Oh yeah.
to whites and deserved to be treated as such, that was even more out there,
Right.
more radical to say that. Now today we wouldn't even blink,
Right.
but back then that was you were literally risking being punched, arrested, run out of town by merely saying it.
Wow.
And so to move your family out here, it was almost certainly certain that you were going to be attacked.
You had to be ready to fight.
Fight, and or if you were a peaceful abolitionist, um, stand and receive and be the recipient of violence.
Right.
The Quakers who came out here and settled in the area, who didn't use violence, faced the same things.
Wow.
So it
That's
was
I that's even more that I think that's even more impressive.
oh yes, the Quakers who settled in the Osawatomie area and out by Lane and in that area. Now, to give the pro-slavery people credit, what they tended to do is differentiate between a pacifist Quaker and a militant abolitionist, in that they would steal everything a Quaker had, but they wouldn't shoot them.
Oh, jeez.
But you're still not doing well. Let's put it that way.
You know, I'm getting the sense now after watching everything and talking with you, I'm getting the sense that, you know, the group, the group of people and later named Jayhawkers, and on the Kansas side, the Free State Jayhawkers and the slave state Bushwhackers on the Missouri side, I'm getting the sense that it was very much tit for tat. It was very much, you're going to steal something, I'm going to steal something. You took my ox, I'm going to take your saddle, and they just went back and forth, you know, stealing things. And you shared a story how there were some free staters that went into Missouri. They sacked a town and there was nothing left, so they just ran into the church and stole Bibles.
Yes, the Jayhawkers under Jennison kept. They rode into Pleasant Hill, Missouri.
Yeah,
and the place had been looted and burned, and they ran, and there was nothing to steal, so they stole Bibles from the American Bible Society. At this point, reason has left the building.
Right. And what's to be clear, both sides have collectively lost their minds.
Yeah. Nobody now. It's a situation where nobody was innocent of wrongdoing.
Right.
We would have to say that one side. Okay, the Quakers.
Okay.
Quakers did not go in and steal things. They just sat down and went, and they appealed back to the Quaker, their supporters back east, who sent them more supplies. They did. You know, the Quakers didn't necessarily ride in, and there were peaceful abolitionists like the Adaires that did not approve of going in and raiding. Reverend Adair strongly disapproved it. He considered it thievery.
Yeah, which it was.
Which it was. You know, there were peaceful abolitionists who said that's thievery. You're, you know, doing it, you know, because they're thieves, did not make them, we become thieves.
Right.
And so to say everybody, one of the things in generalizing about everybody in a group is always illogical.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly right. I appreciate that you're giving some insight into the different types of groups and different types of people that were collecting here in the mid 1800s and building the foundations that we're standing on now. Not the literal foundations, but the community foundations, the mental and moral makeup of this community.
Mm-hmm.
So my next question that I really want to get to is that watching and listening to history professors from like Yale and other places and talking with you, the question comes up was John Brown a terrorist or a hero? And the question gets posed: at what point, where do you draw the line for what the moral line? At what point does it get crossed that violence becomes acceptable? Now you're talking about how the Quakers were pacifists. You know, Reverend Adair, of course, didn't approve of thievery, but I'm sure that he supported John Brown in his quest for use of violence. And as a historian, you're not here to say what's right and what's wrong. You're not here to draw that line, but you're here to help raise awareness that that's a question people need to think about. And philosophers can answer the moral and the ethics of it all. But I think the question I want to ask you is, why is it important for us to contemplate those ideas of drawing a moral line and the use of violence? At what point does violence justify at what point does morality, where's the line of morality that justifies violence? Why is it important for us to think about those types of questions?
Philosophically and morally, they are eternal questions. The important thing, one of the things why studying John Brown, why studying one of the philosophical reasons you want to ask that is this isn't it's an omnipresent issue in humanity.
Mm,
At what point is violence justified? Is it ever justified? Um, and it's one of those things that an historian, as an historian, I can't really answer because it's every individual has to ponder that themselves.
right.
But by studying things like the Bleeding Kansas fight over slavery, by studying the wars and conflicts of the past, you can make a more informed decision by looking at the ramifications of it. Now, there have been various philosophers throughout history. Saint Augustine, our philosophy. If you look at the philosophy of violence that governs really American society and Western society, it's Saint Augustine's just justify philosophy that violence in itself is neutral. It's the motivation for the violence that makes it moral or immoral.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And that's the St. Augustine's um, philosophical, theological study of
Right,
violence.
right.
And for instance, we might say if you have someone who has taken innocent people hostage and all negotiations are broken down and there's every indication that this individual and an individual is going to start killing hostages, if a police officer or a police sniper shoots and kills the criminal, that he was morally justified in doing so.
Okay. That makes sense.
If somebody goes into a bank, for instance, and shoots a bank teller with a shotgun just to make the point that they're serious, that's not moral.
Correct. Yeah.
So the question comes with Brown philosophically was his motivation morally correct? And was the motivation of Free State people correct when they were fighting pro-slavery people, and
Yeah.
conversely,
Right.
were pro-slavery people right in defending what they could perceive to be their motive, their philosophical view, their ideals of life.
Right.
So it's very complex, and it's important to study that stuff because there are questions that you have to ask. Every individual has to ask themselves.
Correct. And I think that's in the I think that's the center of the beginning of Osawatomie, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think that's at the core, at the very core,
Mm-hmm.
is these questions. I don't want to say existential questions, but these are questions that you have to contemplate at some point in your life. And I recall thinking about these ideas not by studying John Brown, but just growing up, and you at some point you have to wonder, when is violence justified, when is
Mm-hmm.
it acceptable, and that's just a really I mean, this town, I guess, is it's ripe with the opportunities for you to think about those ideas. So I that's fantastic. That's amazing. Now I graduated from KU.
Yes.
So I am a Jayhawker.
Yes.
how, how did that term, I think it was credited to Pat Devlin.
Yeah.
Who was Pat Devlin, and how did that term come to be?
Pat Devlin was from Ireland,
Okay.
and there's two versions of the story. Um, because I'll give you the one that uh, probably makes more sense. Um, Pat Devlin was doing what Jayhawkers did. What with the idea behind the war against the guerrilla war was to drive voters out. You
Right.
wanted to drive pro-slavery voters out, Free State voters out. And one way that Jayhawkers would do that is they would ideally identify, although sometimes they didn't bother to identify somebody at a cabin who was a potential pro-slavery voter. They would ride up to the cabin. They would pull them out of their cabin and say, "You've got so much time to leave, or we're going to come back and shoot you."
Okay.
And then what they would do is, uh, this is where morality got set aside on both sides, because they dehumanized the opponent. They thought, well, it's okay for me to steal this guy's stuff.
Right.
So Pat Devlin was riding back into town with saddlebags and some items that he had liberated from a pro-slavery person into town, and
Elegantly put.
uh, he ran into somebody in town who he says, "Well, Pat, where you been?" As winking as if he didn't know where he had been,
Right.
and said, he says, "Well, I've been out jayhawking." And the fella said, "Well, what's that?" And he says, "Well, in the old country, Ireland," he says, "a jayhawk is a bird that worries its prey before it steals from it."
Oh, that's
And so the guy, everybody hear this. This is the greatest. They laughed, and they had a meeting of the fellow Free State guerrillas, and they all had a great life. Let's call ourselves Jayhawkers. So
okay.
they started calling themselves Jayhawkers.
Yeah.
Now that's story one. The other story I heard, and you can decide because both of them came from different sources, was
Right.
that Devlin, that there were posting guards around the town because as Osawatomie was in the middle of pro-slavery territory and it was a target for attack, they would post guards.
Yeah.
And the pro-slavery people had sent in a spy, and he wasn't too good at it.
Okay.
People read him almost immediately. And so Pat Devlin came in from guard duty. They
Okay.
would put them up, very probably up on John Brown's uh, hill on south, and so the guy says, "What you been doing, Pat?" And Pat looked down at him and smiled and says, "Well," he says, "I've been jayhawking." And the guy says, "What's that?" And he says, "Well, that's a bird in the old country that worries its prey before it devours it." And the guy ran off. Now, there's two stories that I've read,
Okay.
so we can decide. But
Right.
as the historian, I can tell you, yes, this is where the term came from.
So it's an old Irish term about a
Yeah,
mythical bird that would worry its prey to death.
yeah,
Okay, so it basically a mythical bully.
mythical bully.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. I love that. You go to school there that nobody sits you down to tell you these things. That's really interesting. Um, John Brown spent parts of 1858. Good gracious. He spent
Oh,
parts.
I do too.
Yeah. He spent parts of that year with Frederick Douglass, and then he, in the very late end of 1858, he came back to Osawatomie, went across the border and stole 11 slaves,
Mm-hmm.
and hustled them up through the Underground Railroad and then onto a literal railroad, and got them to Canada. And I guess as the story goes, when they were crossing the border into Canada, one of the slaves gave birth. So he started with 11 and he ended up with 12
Mm-hmm.
people. He also ran into Harriet Tubman while he was in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And both Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman declined John Brown's offer to take matters in their own hands, right? To engage in violence. What I guess what kind of foresight do you think Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman had to support Brown, but not to not march with him?
Well, I heard Tubman got sick and couldn't join him too. That's one reason she didn't join him. But the other reason is that John Brown, of course, he was very dedicated to the abolitionist cause, and he was a person who believed in putting shoe leather into theory. And
Okay.
the theory was that if you just gave African Americans leadership, weapons, the means of escaping, they just automatically would.
Yeah.
You could just, they would rise up and they would free themselves, which many of them did. But here's the complication. Um, the what the what slaveholders would do to very often slaveholders would be outnumbered 10, 20, 30 to 1 by enslaved African Americans.
Right.
So the way that they kept control was terror.
Right.
If a African American rebelled, ran away, they would inflict very, very cruel punishments. For instance, one punishment was they would burn them alive,
Oh
and
my
they
God.
would get all the slaves out and burn them alive. One was they would flay the skin off of their bodies in front of the other slaves.
Right.
Other ones that, believe it or not, I will not good taste prevents me from going into. So they get
Right.
worse than that.
Yeah. You gave me the chills.
And so Frederick Douglass, when he met with him in a stone quarry in Chatham, before the raid, for 2 days, Brown tried to join us.
Yeah.
He said, "You're going into a perfect steel trap." He says, "Frickin', you don't understand." The slave, he explained the punishments. He says, "You're going to have to give them a lot more assurance that they're going to be safe and that you can do it and that you can take care of them, because they're going to be really doubtful
Yeah.
uh, of you. They're going to say, 'Well, that's great, but am I going to be caught and give these horrible punishments?'"
Right.
And so that's the reason that he didn't. That Frederick Douglass was telling him he had been a slave. He had been subject to those punishments,
Right.
and so he knew what he was talking about. So it's easy for it was and Brown being idealistic like he was, hey, let's do this.
Yeah.
And Frederick was going, whoa, you don't understand, because you're doing it. You're looking at it from the outside. I've experienced this.
Right. Right. It almost seems like there's this this idealism is going to carry the day with John Brown. Who cares what happens to me? The ideal is going to live on forever. And I'm going to go. I almost like he almost with like a blind faith that it's going to work out. Just take these guys and let's go storm Harper's Ferry. It
Mhm.
almost seems, I don't want to say haphazard, because I don't know that, but just from what I'm gathering, it was, you know, he really genuinely believed he had a higher authority on his side. You know,
Mhm.
um, I also, somebody, I don't know who said it, but somebody said, John Brown's not somebody you wanted to sit down and have lunch with. He was probably not somebody you want to spend a whole lot of time with. Apparently super strict Calvinist. Um,
Mhm.
and he really not only embraced, but he was the biggest, you know, sounder of the alarm for violence. The only way anything's going to happen is with violence. He really carried the torch as far as that goes. Uh,
Mhm.
and so he that I feel like that haphazard, that it's going to work out regardless. That attitude, that mentality, is ultimately what got him captured at Harper's Ferry.
Yes. He he was once he made a plan. One of the problems was, once he made a plan, he was going to carry it through.
Uh-huh.
And when they raided Harper's Ferry, he had gathered 50 African Americans who had joined him, actually,
Yeah.
and voluntarily joined him. And he thought, well, I've got 50. This plan is working out well. The Virginia militia and Maryland militias were folding in around him, and his men, John Kagi and his other men, were saying, now we've got to get out of here.
Right.
We're getting surrounded. He said, no, I got 50, 50. There's more coming. It's more coming. Don't panic yet.
Yeah.
They were panicking because they're looking out around and they're getting surrounded. And John Kagi kept sending runners going, let's go now
Yeah.
because we're going to. Well, he waited too long and they got cut off and they got surrounded
Sure.
because he was going to stick to his plan no matter what. Because in his mind, it was working.
Right.
In everyone else's mind, it was working, but in his it was working.
Did he call him, he called himself Osawatomie John Brown, but there's this idea that he called himself a captain. Is that because of this provisional constitution that he wrote?
No, actually, that was a common thing to do.
Oh, okay. So like a
In
nickname.
If you were a leader, if you were the military leader of a guerrilla group, if you were a leader of a ad hoc military, group, you would be called the captain. That was like, it's like we would say leader, we would say something of that nature, and they would use the term captain. So anybody, if you were at the head of 6 men riding up, they would say, "Oh, you're the captain of this unit."
Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. So after he was caught, he spent roughly 100 days in prison awaiting his death and by hanging. He famously sent and received hundreds of letters, and
Mhm.
he was able to meet with his wife. I feel like that it wasn't real jail at that point. It was more custodial just make sure he doesn't run off kind of a thing.
Mhm.
Because he was able to take visitors and he was able to meet with people. And have you ever personally come across any of those letters that he wrote while he was in that 100 days while he's awaiting his sentence?
Yes.
Really?
I've read most. I've read a lot of them
Wow.
online, and I've held one in my hand.
Where now when you held it in your hand, where were you?
I
What
was here at the
letter?
cabin. Someone came and brought it in.
Somebody brought you at the cabin, somebody brought you one of his letters.
They allowed me, said to hold it and read it.
Wow, that's amazing. Do you
My
think
job is never boring. I don't consider this work.
right? Oh no, yeah, and we haven't really even touched too much on what it is that you actually do, which I want to talk about that here in just a moment. But uh, those letters, what was the tenor? What was the tone of those letters after Harper's Ferry's over? He's got that 100 days basically before he's going to be hung by the Union Army. What's the tenor? What's that tone of those letters? Was he glorifying himself? Did he know that he was being a martyr? Was he more of a I shouldn't have done that? Is it um I don't want to say conciliatory tone, but like what was the tone of those letters? What was his attitude during those 100 days?
There were a lot of the letters went, "Please take care of my family." He
Okay.
was writing letters out to his supporters. He was worried about the fate of his wife and his children. He was writing to supporters, "Please take care of me, so that my wife is taken care of." The other one was that he actually uh, you have to. Okay, this is where you get into it gets very complex because he was 59 years old.
Right.
Now you think that's not very old in our era, but think 89 in the 1850s.
Right.
So here he is. Most of the people have died younger than him. He's going to, as a abolitionist, everything he writes is being published in the paper.
Right.
He succeeded as far as he's concerned because he's getting the message out. And a lot of the letters were, you read them, they read like press releases because they were press releases.
Yeah.
And northern newspapers were publishing them. People were reading them, and they were having big, meetings, abolitionist meetings, where somebody would walk up. I have a letter from John Brown, the Osawatomie John Brown, and they would read it, and people would clap and weep and cry and all that. If you read them, they sound. He was a very intelligent man.
Mm-hmm.
He was a great speaker. You could, if you had an organization and you wanted to put someone in charge of fundraising, he was your man because he could get up in front of people and people would be reaching in their wallets.
Wow.
Uh, so he was going, I've succeeded. I'm 59. I'm probably going to die relatively soon anyway. I might as well die for my cause.
Yeah.
So he was not despondent about it. As a matter of fact, when he was being taken to be hung and sitting on his coffin, riding in a wagon, one his comment was a very rather cheery. He says, "Beautiful country here, isn't it?"
No.
To the,
Goodness.
and when he was about to be hung, and sorry, instead, uh, the only thing he said was when he stood up there with the hood on, says, "Any last words?" He says, "No, just make it quick."
Wow.
Basically,
Goodness.
that's all he said. That's all he said. Calm as he could be.
Yeah, that's somebody who's definitely accepted his he knew the way his story was being written, and
Yep.
I mean, for the most part he was writing it, but he he accepted the day when it came. I think it's kind of interesting because there were what 3,000 Union soldiers there to prevent any sort of uh escape attempts or anything like that whenever he was hung. I almost wonder if the letters and things that he was writing to newspapers that were getting printed, if people saw it at the time, if there were some people that saw it as his attempt to kind of wiggle his way out of it, or if
Mm-hmm.
or if it was more of a, hey, I've accepted this, just take care of business.
I accepted it because, believe it or not, there was a workable plan to get him out of there. One of his men from Kansas actually became one of his guards.
Wow.
Okay, standing there in front of the cell with keys,
Wow.
going, "John, we've got people willing to help get out of here." He looked at him. He says, "No, I'm much more useful where I'm at."
Wow.
And he refused all attempts to make him to, and literally talked his way in as a guard, standing there with the keys, going, "We'll get you out of here." And
Right.
he said, "Nope."
That's
Turn it down.
incredible. That's incredible. So he knew that he was more he people were going to hear him from prison more, and he knew that he was better off staying and accepting
Exact
it.
words he said to the guy who quoted him. He says, "I'm much better off and much more useful here in dead than alive to the abolitionist cause."
Wow. So that's really impressive. I'm trying to think, like, if there was a modern day prisoner that had that kind of access, had that kind of publicity. I know you see documentaries, of, I can't think, Herner Herzog or something, going and talking to people on death row, but it's nothing like the kind of access that people had to John Brown at that time. That's really interesting. That's a really interesting story.
Oh yes, I said the deeper you dig, the more interesting it gets.
Yeah.
Uh, I always learn new things every day.
Yeah. So two more things and then I'll let you get on with your day. Number one, what kind of lessons do you think that we can take away from those early days of Osawatomie at the beginning, those early days of Osawatomie? What kind of life lessons do you think we as a community today can take away from those?
No matter how bad things get, Osawatomie survives.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Osawatomie
awesome.
has survived being burned to the ground roughly before as it was founded. It was rebuilt. After that, we survived floods, fires. Um, in 1922, there was a railroad strike that almost killed the town. Bounced back. Uh, Osawatomie is one of those communities that if you study the town's history, we survive.
That's
You go down, we get back up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I love that, man, because that's kind of that's what I'm trying to do with these with this web series. What is the undercurrent? What is what is this town really made of? And I'm poking holes at it, and I love that there's this sense of persistence and rolling up your sleeves and getting the work done, doing what it takes to move forward. And I love that I love that that's the lesson that we can take away from those first settlers here in Osawatomie is that the town will move forward, whether it's the major floods that's happened, or man-made catastrophes, or the railroad leaving, whatever it might be. This town's gonna move forward and stay persistent. Oh gosh, I love that. I absolutely love that. Now, you are the caretaker of the Adair cabin at
Yes.
at John Brown Park. What I do with my students is I once a week I have them do some reflection where they have to give me a rose, a thorn, and a seed. The rose being the best thing, the thorn being the worst thing, and the seed is being something that you've learned. What's your big takeaway? What's that one big takeaway that you have? So what would be your rose, thorn, and seed when it comes to being the caretaker of the Adair cabin?
The rose is that I get to educate people, the public, Osawatomie citizens, people from all over the world about the vital, important, nationally, internationally important history of Osawatomie on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And the thorn is I do have to deal sometimes with neo-Confederates, and I have to learn diplomacy and tact on a grand scale.
Okay.
And the takeaway, the reflection, or the takeaway, the lesson I've learned is that I always have more to learn.
Oh wow.
The wise man knows that he isn't.
Right. Yeah, in mathematics, so they say that the smartest mathematicians know what they don't know, which is kind of paradoxical and if you think about it in logic. How do you, if you know what you don't know, then you actually know. But anyway, I love that you're still on this quest for learning, and learning being the central focus. Big takeaway that you have there is that you're right. We're constantly learning, no matter what age we get to. We don't just stop learning one day. And I love that you still have I call it a river of spirit when it comes to this. You still have that spirit to continue to learn and take on new information and new things. I think that's fantastic. That's absolutely wonderful. Is there anything else from the early days, the beginning of Osawatomie that you want to highlight before I let you go?
The fact that our pioneers and the women, let me focus in on women.
Okay.
Women don't get mentioned to the degree that they should in history. This town would not exist without the women who unheralded took care of the escaping slaves. They were the ones who primarily did that in the many houses that were Underground Railroad centers here. They took care of families in under horrible stress, and that the women deserve credit. This is just something that people don't really realize, because we tend to concentrate on John Brown and the people that get written about a lot. But
Right.
that's just something to keep in mind, is that the ladies that helped to found this town.
Yeah, absolutely. I will forever refer to my wife as the queen of my castle. She is the one that runs the show back home. So you're right. The women definitely deserve to get more credit and be highlighted more. So I appreciate that. That's fantastic. Well, Grady, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I hope that we get an opportunity to explore more about this town, and I really look forward to spending more time with you.
Absolutely, there's a lot to explore.
That's right.
Thank
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
I will. Bye.
Bye-bye.